She's an international activist. She fights against a whole range of different causes. She's actually over here representing the American Indians and the Lakota, I believe, in particular. Yeah, the people from the Black Hills. So, yeah, without further ado, Selina Berger.
Brothers and sisters, I join you here this evening because of my deep interest to justice for all people on our Mother Earth who needs a voice to be heard for proper rights, same like anyone else in this world. So I stand here in the name of justice. At the heart of a civilized system is the belief that each man, each child is like a drop of water. Without an ocean would not exist. But we should not forget that together we are an ocean which can turn into a power no one can conquer. Therefore, to make justice work for indigenous people in a worldwide civilized system where profit is their touchstone of value, we need to create a worldwide circle to stand up as one. Hand in hand goes the power to be heard. It can't be that governments have an endless power to act against the will of its people. If we do not want this, then we have to stand up against this, and this should be our supreme goal. After research, let me begin by looking back in history to the time before Captain Cook and Columbus arrived offshore to kill millions of people for profit from the year 1496 to the year 2011. The land that Columbus and Captain Cook and his crew left behind was for most of its people a land of violence, squalor, treachery, slavery, and intolerance. So, and this is before Columbus arrived on the land of the American Indians. More than 40,000 years ago, the population of the world was small, and people lived in family groups. Hunting, fishing, and food gathering. There were no cultivated crops, animals were not herded for food, and metalworking was yet to be discovered. The same as at Indian land, the first Aboriginal found in Australia with a better environment than today. Large animals now extinct provided more meat than the animals which we are familiar. Some parts of the continent were richer in vegetable foods, but the land contained no cultivated crops or animals that could be domesticated, such as cattle and sheep. Whatever the early history, came had involved a way of living that was in harmony with the environment and that satisfied their needs. The Aboriginal people adjusted to the environment, learned to understand it, and gained the maximum benefit from it. And that's about the land after Columbus and Captain Cook arrived. All that was to change, however, with shocking, deadly sadness, once those ships came into view on the rim of the horizon, for it was then only a matter of months before there would begin the worst serious human disasters, combined with the most extensive and most violent programs of human genocide this world has ever seen. In 1892, 541 nations, approximately 10 million people, lived in what is now the United States. The US government ratified 371 treaties with these Indian nations between 1776 and 1871. Chief Red Cloud of the Lakota said, "They made many promises to us, but they kept only one. They promised to take our land, and they took it." So what and where are we today? Here, I do not have to mention of how Aboriginal people and Native Indians were abused back in history. But what I want to talk about is what both have in common by facing the European-style government's injustice, death in custody, drugs and alcohol, racism, and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which has not been met and which the United States voted against it, but now supported by counting hard on its not binding law. Why? because American Indians have claims to huge land masses, and I strongly believe they do fear lose a mass of land rights to its native people. In this picture, there are words taken from an announcement the United States made about the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights, and words of John Bolton. He said about not binding in. My you noticed the same as I did. Again, here we notice how governments are setting things up, which is only good for their profit. And they don't give a shit about what is good for their native people. Now, there are 4 brutal happenings I want to talk about. There's Wounded Knee compared to Nunkanba, and the Trail of Tears compared to Pinchara Massacre. Let me talk about the Pinchara Massacre, which is otherwise known as the Battle of Pinchara. The Pinchara Massacre would go down in Western Australia's history as one of the state's most bloody darkest days. On the 28th of October 1834, a party of men led by Governor James Sterling surrounded the camp of the Binjindar Nunjangar in Pinchara and opened fire, killing up to 30 tribe people as they fled for cover. The real figure may never be known. I knew the women and men and children would be separated due to cultural business. Children and many others were murdered in horrific ways. Warrior Yagan was part of the group who defended the tribe. To compare this with what happens to native Indians at the time on the other side of the world, 4 years before the Indian Removal Act was signed into law by Andrew Jackson on May 28, 1830, authorizing the president to grant unsettled land west of the Mississippi in exchange for Indian lands within existing state borders. A few tribes went peacefully, but many resisted the relocation policy. During the fall and winter of 1838 and 1939, the Cherokees were forcibly moved west by the United States government. Roughly 4,000 Cherokees died on this forced march, which became known as the Trail of Tears. The correspondence of the immigration of Indians was published in 1834 as part of the United States serial sets. I now want to continue with the Nunkanba massacre. If history is a guide, then they are in for a hard fight. Roughly at the same time when the Lakota Sioux tribe suffered on the infamous Wounded Knee in 1890, Aboriginal people were massacred in 1880. To make way for the pastoral industry in Canada, those that survived were forced to work on stations for rations. As late as 1956, Aboriginal prisoners were still being secured in neck chains. In the 70s, the community met and decided they would resist all attempts to till their land. They had already had bad experience with mining company CRA tramping across their property, disturbing grave sites, and removing sacred ceremonial objects. One of their leaders, Dickie Skinner, may he rest in peace, went to Perth with a petition supported by the unions. He said, "These people have already made no place no good with their bulldozers. Our sacred places they have made no good. They mess up our land. They expose our sacred objects. Today we beg you that you truly stop that." At the time, the people of Pine Ridge were being attacked by the authorities. The Aboriginal people were having their culture plundered by the oil companies on Nunkanba in 1972. The similarity stands out, and the pain from loss of culture damages a community beyond repair. So what happened in Wounded Knee? First, of course, my deepest sympathy goes out to those who have lost their lives to this act of criminal piracy and to their families. a landmark treaty between the U.S. government and the Lakota Nation, the Fort Laramie Treaty, was signed in 1868. The Fort Laramie Treaty guaranteed to Indians absolute and undisturbed use of the Great Sioux Reservation. The treaty also stated that no treaty for the cession of any portion or part of the reservation shall be of any validity or force unless executed and signed by at least 3/4 of all the adult male Indians, a clause in the treaty that still has importance today. Transgression on the reservation by miners and the railroads continued, and the U.S. government sought to take possession of Pahasapa using a treaty of Indians refused to sign. One does not sell the land on which people walk, Crazy Horse declared. The government simply took what it wanted, however, and eventually declared the Fort Laramie Treaty invalid. The Great Sioux Reservation, secured by the Indians in perpetuity, was separated into the 7 reservations that exist today. The Indians fought back, winning 2 major battles in a 10-year period. But by 1878, their plight was a hopeless one. Those who continued to resist were declared hostile, hunted, and forced to live in areas close to the government's force. As was once observed, the purpose of the reservation system was to reduce the wild beast to the condition of supplicants for charity. To eliminate American Indians, they killed what India needed most, the buffaloes. Life on the reservation was very harsh, and the dissident Indians were treated with starvation to force them to cooperate. After the killing of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, Bigfoot, now the leading traditional chief, set out with his people on a long winter trek across the Badlands, seeking safety with Red Cloud's people at Pine Ridge. On December 29, 1890, Bigfoot and 200 or more unarmed Mini-Kushu men, women, and children, with a few fugitives from Sitting Bull's Papa band, were slaughtered by the 7th Cavalry at Wounded Knee. Custer's former regiment, decimated by Indians at the battle at Little Bighorn, was avenged. For this barbarous and cowardly act, 20 soldiers received Congressional Medals of Honors. Custer died. Now, before I introduce you to respected and loved American Indian elder Wambly Tate, let me tell you of what happens after the massacre in Wounded Knee, capitulated to the Indian demands that seriously charges be filed against the white men responsible for Yellow Thunder's death. This action gained IEM the lasting respect of the Pine Ridge Reservation. Tension on Pine Ridge increased when in January 1973 a young man named Wesley Badheart Bull was stabbed to death, like the murderers of Raymond Yellow, involved manslaughter. The officials were uneasy when they heard that IEM was mobilizing and brought heavy police support to a meeting with the Indians in the courthouse in Custer. On February 6th, the more than 200 Indian people who had arrived for the meeting were told by officials that the open meeting was postponed and only their spokesman, Russell Mean, Dennis Banks, Crow Dog, and a young Choctaw named David Hill were allowed inside to talk to officials. When Sarah Badheart Bull, mother of the victim, attempted to enter, she was seized and beaten on the courthouse step by 2 police officers. Those Indians who tried to intervene were tear-gassed and beaten. Then a riot broke out throughout the courthouse. All through, no one was killed. The Custer courthouse was an historic event. The first outbreak of violence between white men and Lakota since the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890. On February 27th, 1973, members of the IEM, together with a number of local traditional American Indians began their 71-day occupation on Wounded Knee in South Dakota. Their goal was only to protest injustice against their tribes, violation of the many treaties with the United States government, and current abuses and repression against their people. There were no radical demands made, and that was asked was that the government only follows their own law. The US government responded to the occupation of Wounded Knee with a military-style assault. Two brave warriors, Buddy Lemon and Frank Clearwater, died during the siege, where over 200,000 rounds of ammunition were fired at the protesters. To end the siege, various officials promised hearing on local conditions and treaty violations. These hearings were never convened. From the year 1973 until now, Wounded Knee and its trials are well described on the internet. One of the famous trials is the Leonard Peltier case, America's famous political prisoner who is not guilty as they want him to look like. He attended meetings on the reservation to discuss the government's decision to terminate Turtle Mountain. He recalls one Ojibwa lady, a cousin, who stood up angrily and asked in a loud, emotional, tear-filled voice, "Where are our warriors? Why don't they stand up and fight for their starving people?" That sent electric vibration from my scalp all the way down my spine to the soles of my feet, Peltier says. It was like a revelation to me that there was actually something worthwhile you could do with your life, something more important than living our own selfish little life day by day. Yes, there was something more important than your poor, miserable self. Your people. You could actually stand up and fight for them. And as I would come to see in later years, all Indian people, all indigenous people, all human beings of good heart, I vowed right then and there that I would become a warrior and that I did always work to help my people. It's a vow I've done my best to keep. So where are we today, and how is the life quality for Lakota people in 2011? On the Great Plains, hidden away on little traveled back roads, is an American prisoner of war camp number 334. This is also known as Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, the home of the proud Lakota Sioux. They are the tribe that suffered the infamous Wounded Knee massacre, in which an estimated 350 Lakota were killed. Sadly, Pine Ridge continues to be the setting for an ongoing massacre within the tribe. Gangs on the reservation are out of control, and the violence they live by grips even the smallest villages. Unemployment on the reservation fluctuates between 85 and 90%. The housing office is unable to afford to build new structures, and existing structures are falling apart. Many are homeless, and those with homes are packed into rotten buildings with up to 5 families. 39% of the homes on the Pine Ridge reservations have no electricity. Now, to name just one net activity in which we succeeded. Last month I got an information from Bombay that in Pine Ridge the electricity was cut off again, and we started a worldwide net activity. The result was just perfect, as the electricity was reconnected because of worldwide pressure on the electricity company. This shows how great things change if people just stand up for our people. It is reported that at least 60% of the homes on the Pine Ridge Reservation are invested with black molds, which causes an often volatile condition with infants, children, and the elderly. According to 2006 resources, about 97% of the population lives below federal poverty levels. The tuberculosis rate on Pine Ridge Reservation is approximately 8 times higher than the US national average. The infant mortality rate is the highest on the continent and is about 3 times higher than the US national average. Cervical cancer is 5 times higher than the US national average. The school dropout rate is over 70%. Teacher turnover is 8 times that of US national average. Frequently, grandparents are raising their grandchildren because their own children have succumbed to alcoholism, domestic violence, and general apathy. Making life even more grim, the 50% of the population over 40 suffer from diabetes, and the life expectancy for men is a mere 48 years of age. And now, how is the life quality of Aboriginal people today? Aboriginal people can expect to live up to 20 years less than non-Aboriginal Australians. Aboriginal life expectancy is so low because Aboriginal health standards in Australia are now so bad that 45% of Aboriginal men and 34% of women die before the age of 45. 71% die before they reach the age of 65. According to the United Nations, the quality of life of Aboriginal people is the second worst of the planet. Only China rates fourth. Causes for this poor health and low life expectancy include poverty, poor nutrition, poor housing, dispossession of their traditional lands, low education level, high unemployment, hidden racism, and inability of politicians to address Aboriginal problems. The number of babies of Aboriginal mothers are more likely to be a low birth high, which I would say less than 2,500, compared to those of non-Aboriginal mothers. 30% of adults in Aboriginal communities suffers from type 2 diabetes. 60% Aboriginal people are more likely to die from all cancer types than non-Indigenous people. 10 times Aboriginal people living in remote communities are more likely to develop dementia than people living in countries such as Africa, India, or Indonesia. I'm going now to connect you via Skype to my brother Wamblik Tati, but before I do that, I'm going to end my speech with a poem from Leonard Peltier, which is named Silence Scream. Silence, they say, is the voice of complicity, but silence is impossible. Silence screams. Silence is a message. Justice doing nothing is an act. Let who you are ring out and resonate in every word and deed. Yes, become who you are. There is no sidestepping your own being or your own responsibility. What you do is who you are. You are your own competence. You become your own message. You are the message. In the spirit of Crazy Horse, Leonard Peltier. So far from me, thank you a lot for your attention, and may you be blessed by our Creator, who always will guide my ways, and may He protect my people from those who speak with forked tongues, give promises they never want to keep, and end up with unfulfilled arrangements. My words is my bond, and I will always walk the talk for justice. For that, I raise my fist up in the air. Thank you very much.